This time on the Prop Master, well, we just about finished this up. I say just about because I need at least one more episode before I can convince all of you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Go ahead, I'll wait. All kidding aside, it is really important that you do subscribe to the channel and like the video if possible, because that's what YouTube uses for its algorithm in placing this video. But enough of that. In this video, we're going to pretty much finish this, but not quite. We're going to get it ready for paint. We'll go ahead and put a glossy black coat on it, which you're going to want to skip. Don't do that. Then we're going to cover it in silver. Have a lot of patience for drying. We're going to mask everything off at that point for damage, and go ahead and put the red on top of that. Clean it all up. Get everything ready to put all the weathering that we're going to do in the next video. But with all that to do, we better get started. So the first thing we need to do is to smooth everything out. And as you can probably see, I've already started because thanks to me painting everything with this, what I thought was filler primer, but it's actually just filler. I've got a lot of filler that I've got to smooth out real smooth. You won't have to do that much unless, of course, your plastic has a texture to it, in which case you want to try to smooth that, down to a reasonably fine surface. We're going to go ahead and spray a filler primer over this. So that will give us something to smooth down to a much smoother surface eventually. But if you've got like a sort of an orange peel texture on your Sintra or whatever you're using, you're going to want to try to smooth that down as much as possible. And just with sanding sticks or sandpaper, for some things you can use a Dremel tool, or maybe you could get away with the finger sander, but that's absolutely as much power as you want to use. You're really going to be, basically just smoothing everything off with hand power. Now, as well as texture, you want to smooth things out, like here where my PVC pipe here stuck out just a tiny bit past my Sintra here, so I needed to flatten that out so that that's perfectly smooth across there. And unfortunately, all you can do is just spend a little bit of time and do that. The more time you spend here, the easier everything else is going to be. Now that said, this is Boba Fett's, it's been used and abused for 20-odd years of heavy use. It doesn't have to be perfect. And any things that are any nicks or scratches, things that are uneven, like I don't know if you can see in here, there's definitely this is not a smooth transition from this piece of Sintra into this piece of PVC at the top. And I can just use that as an excuse to go in with some silver and put dings all across there, and it'll look great. So you don't have to get crazy about that, but just remember this is supposed to be metal, so it needs to be pretty smooth. And this is going to be a while, mostly with a little piece of sandpaper. Start out with, say, like a 200 grit sandpaper. I don't think, unless you're doing something over here where I'm having to actually reshape, where I'm, having to bring this down even with the Sintra, then you can use something more aggressive like a 100 grit or a 60 grit. But then you're going to spend all that. Remember, it'll be faster, but the more you use a lower grit, a lower number grit, the more time you're going to have to spend taking out all the scratches from that. So just keep that in mind. What I'm using right now, I believe, is a, it's either a 200, I think it's a 200. I take it back, it's not, it's a 400. I remember that now. So this is a 400, especially for this filler. If this was a 200, it would be scratching through it pretty easily. Because this is just one quick coat of the filler that I put on here. You don't need to watch me spend an hour and a half just going over this thing, sanding. So I'll be back as soon as I've just kind of, I'm not doing anything major, just smoothing everything down, making sure everything's even. And then I'll be right back. So while you're filing or sanding, some places that you want to really pay attention to are like these seams where you've got this base piece here and then these pieces on top of it. You don't want it to look like that. You want it to look like one solid piece of metal. So that's all of your seams where you've got pieces stuck on top of other pieces. That's you want to really make sure that this is like one solid piece and not like a little step in there somewhere. So I've just got my 120 grit sanding stick, and I can lay that across there and just go to town. And when I finish with this, I'll go ahead and go in with my finer sandpaper to make sure everything is nice and smooth, but that it's one continuous piece. I can really tell here how there's a dark line. Let's have it, you can see it. Where there's a dark line right across here. That really shows me that you know, there's a low spot. This really clean area is a high spot. This kind of partially sanded is in the middle, and that dark area is a low spot. So I'll have to sand this until it's all one, you know, continuous color. So I'll be back when I get finished with that. Okay, so I just finished up with the 320 grit sandpaper or sanding stick on this, back and forth to make sure there's no scratches. And as you can see here, you know, it's the same color on both the top and bottom above that same. I'm not as worried about up here because that's all one piece, or back in this area here. But where these two pieces are joined, I can see that they're the same color. There's no low spots or high spots at this point. I can see a line there, but I think that's just because the glue itself, you know, has a color sometimes. I can't feel it when I run my fingernail across there, so that's gonna be fine. Not just this seam, but also these, you know, are a little different. They're not smooth together, but like it through here, you know, we got to get all that cleaned up. Once again, I'm having trouble because of this nylon material being so much more resistant to anything than everything else, but I think I've got that pretty smooth. And we're going to go ahead and once you get all this stuff smoothed off everywhere, you won't have the problems I had because I had to smooth out all this filler. You just want to remove any texture. And once you get everything nice and smooth, we can go ahead and mask off what we don't want to be painted and hit this with a filler primer. So let me get some tape. So remember this guy from a few videos ago? Well, I still have it. So let's see if I can, okay. So there's that. And I've just got some masking tape. And I just want to, I mean, this wouldn't be too much of a problem if I get painted. I could just paint it black again, but why give myself more work? Just gonna wrap this around the light. Making sure that I get all the way to the bottom. I'm going to kind of fold it over because I want to be able to get behind here as much as I can. It's going to take some, I'm not using this for sandpaper, just something that's stiff, and I can make sure that it's away from the side here and actually wrapped around the button or the light itself. Now I've just got these two guys here, and I think I'll just do the exact same thing. Cut off some tape, wrap it around the base. Okay. Oh, one last thing I did when I was sanding was I took my little cone Dremel and I just went into the center part really good, make sure it was nice and smooth and not a jagged. I want to make sure this looks like a hole, not a broken piece in there. Just make sure it's nice and smooth. But now we can go ahead and hit this with some filler primer. Just one coat. This is what we're going to paint it with. It's just a 2-in-1 filler and primer. I'm going to go with a light coat. We'll probably do a couple of coats actually. One application, but a couple of coats. A light coat and then a little heavier coat. Not really worried about the inside of it at this point. Notice I have the hook coming down to the inside and just coming up here right where this little seam is, so it's not really covering much up. Really should have a respirator on while I'm doing this. I'm going to at least turn the fan on and get some circulation going. Okay, I've got my respirator here and got the garage door open just in time for the neighbors to start mowing their lawn, so. Just trying to get all of the insides of these little squares, you know, shoot up to get the bottoms and down at the tops and all that stuff. But that should be good enough for this one. Okay, I'm going to let this dry for about 20 minutes and I'll come back and put on a much heavier coat that'll pretty much cover everything. Okay, this is completely dry and we can go ahead and put on another coat. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a perfect coat, we just want to get pretty good coverage. Mostly I'm just wanting to use this to fill in any small scratches also, so that I can just kind of see how smooth things actually are. You definitely want to make sure that you don't get any drips on here, because that's just going to make things a lot worse. Okay, so go ahead and let this dry, and then we can go on to the next step. So now that the paint is dried and everything, I can take a look at this. And what I can see is that I still have some work to do. By painting this all one color again, it makes the joints and things that aren't quite right, stand out a lot more. So this area that I was really worried about here actually looks pretty good. I can see the tiniest hint that has two pieces, but it's not much. I may sand that just a little bit more. I think maybe the filler itself will take care of that. Other parts, like this area in here, I've got a lot more work to do. I can clearly see the joint between the PVC pipe and this piece of Sintra in the front, along with a line there, another line across here. So that needs quite a bit more work. I can also see that this looks terrible through here. A lot of this I'll fix a little bit later on, but it still needs a little bit of work. So I'm going to sand on this a little bit more, and then we'll take a look at it after I go through one more session of sanding. Now that we have everything smoothed out, we can go on to some filling in some of these little cracks that are around. You're going to find some areas, so I can find one here, like this right here. This is not caused because these are not level with each other, because they're definitely are flat, but there's actually a physical gap where they're not touching. So no amount of sanding is going to fill that little crack. For things like that, we're going to go ahead and use some of this DAP caulking. I like to use this Alex Fast Dry. It's difference between I can paint this in 20 minutes instead of having to wait 24 hours, or some of the other ones are a little longer. Things like this, I really am tempted to use the bumper repair kit that I used on the helmet, because I can sand that afterwards. But I think I'm going to end up just trying to smooth this out with my fingers and not having to worry about trying to sand in some of these really tight little nooks and crannies. This caulking is also going to come in handy filling in this area right here. I just want to smooth out this really rough area here and fill in this gap at the bottom so it looks like this is one solid piece. I don't want this to look like it's sticking out. I want it to, sort of connect down at the bottom here. The other place, I mentioned in the last video that I was thinking about running a bead of hot glue down here, and I did, and it was a bit of a disaster. It took forever for me to get it smooth. I'm having to go over basically taking the hot glue gun without any glue and just running the tip of it across there over and over to try to smooth out all the little bumps. And in truth, I should have used this and not worried about it. So I'll try to smooth that out as well with the caulking here. So in order to use this, it's pretty simple. Also have, you notice, a little glass of, a little bowl of water. That's just for lubrication. I'll dip my finger in that so that my finger slides across the caulk and not trying to pull it up. I don't want to remove the caulk, I just want to smooth it out. So let's start with these little cracks here. Also have one right here as well. And I've already cut the very tip off. You don't want to make a really big hole. You want it to be a pretty small, precise hole in this. And I want to get it right up against it. and push so that I can push some of this down into the gap. And I think I'll open this up before I do this, otherwise I'll end up gluing this down with the caulk. Hopefully that's still on camera. And holding this, I'm just going to stick this in the corner. And try to run as smooth as possible a bead all the way down. Next, I can dip my finger in the water, and I just want to lightly start smoothing this out. This would also be a good time to have a rag or a paper towel. You don't want your fingers so wet that the water's carrying the caulk off. You don't want to just flood the area with water. But if your finger's not wet, it'll just grab part of the caulk and pull it up, and you'll get all kinds of little streaks and things in the caulking. If you had to pick one or the other, probably too much water is better than too little water. But the thing about this is you can't sand this afterwards, so work on it until you get it as smooth as you want it. In this case, I am actually removing some of that caulk. Okay, that looks pretty good. And now I'm just going to try and fill in these little holes down here. Kind of the way I did. I was trying to do the same basic thing with the hot glue, but this I can smooth out, and the hot glue is a little bit more difficult. Don't get a lot of water on here. This is still an electrical switch. I don't want to damage anything. And this may go switch over to my pinky on this. And I may have to go back and do this a couple of times on this one. I can't sand it or anything, but I can put more caulk over the top of it to fill in some more holes, make it a little deeper. I'm going to go ahead and let this dry. And now I'm going to do any of the work on here that looks like there's some separation. Actually, even though there is a little bit of separation there, there's not enough. If I put it there, it's going to make a big rounded area. I think I can fill that with just the filler. Yeah, same goes here. So I'm just going to worry about this sort of a big seam here. Try to make as smooth a bead as I can do, which apparently isn't very smooth. Okay, and first I'm going to use my finger without any water on it. Well, maybe just a little bit of water. Because I'm going to be actually kind of trying to remove some of this caulk. Notice I'm not going very far. Okay, now I'm going to get serious about smoothing this out. I think I'm going to put a little bit here right in the very end. And I can see a little bit of a hole. I think we're good there. And once again, when this completely cures, I'm going to paint over it, and if I see some, if it's still really rough with some little jagged edges up there, I'll go ahead and do this all over again. Just add a little bit more of this to fill in the gaps, and eventually we'll get a nice smooth little joint there. Probably not going to know how well this is until I paint it again. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more. I can feel that there's stuff sticking up, so I think we can add some more. And this will be sticking up along with this stuff, so I think it's not going to get messed up when it's drying. And I'm just kind of playing this by ear. I don't have any grand plan for this or anything, just kind of trying to smooth it out. Okay. So now that the Alex Fast Dry has cured, we can kind of go over it. You can see there's some areas where there's like where the water all evaporated and left a little white line. I don't feel anything, but if you can feel a little bit, you can kind of scratch that off or take some really fine sandpaper and kind of go over it to try to remove any relief. Mostly it's just a bit of an opaque color to it. You know, there's not really like a ridge there or anything. It's just that the caulk itself left a little bit of an opaque line. But in some areas where it gets really thick, you can kind of feel that there is a little bit of a relief there. And we want to smooth that out, obviously. This is actually wet dry sandpaper, so we could wet it a little bit. I'm just using my finger to run across that edge because I can feel it peeling up a little bit. There's just a almost microscopic layer of the Alex Fast Dry. Okay, once we have everything smooth and it all looks good, this might be still a little bit rough, but I think it's going to be okay. And the only way to know for sure is to go ahead and paint. So, you know the drill. Let's go ahead and mask this off, and we'll go ahead and hit this with another coat of the primer filler. Okay, so the caulk is dried and I've painted everything over. Everything looks really good, actually. I'm really happy about all the little cracks. The only place that I'm a little concerned, or not really concerned, but that needs more work is right here. If I can get a little closer. What I want is for this to be one line that comes from this switch all the way down to the base here, and this is still clearly sticking out with some stuff stuck underneath it. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this with some more of the Alex Fast Dry and smooth it again, smooth it out, and let that cure. In this case, I'm just kind of tapping it in to fill the spaces without removing a lot of it. Now I'm just trying to smooth that a little bit. You can also use a makeup sponge. I'm gonna grab one real quick. This is just a regular makeup sponge like you'd find at any makeup store. Any place that sells makeup is probably going to have little sponges like this. And this is not as effective as your finger, but there are some times when a sharp corner is what you really need, and you know your fingers don't come with those. I'm just trying to avoid one of those, you know, thick lines. I'm tempted to leave that alone because it looks pretty good. Sometimes you just have to know when to stop. And get rid of that little sharp point. Okay, now I'm going to let this cure, and then I'll put one last coat of the filler primer on, and I think we'll be good to go from there. Okay, so this looks much better now. It's much flatter. There's not a lot of texture here. I mean, it still looks pretty bad, to be honest, but by the time you know, I get through painting this and putting dirt in here, and it'll be fantastic. And we could go ahead and start painting right here the way it is now, but the smoother this is, the more it's going to read like metal. And you could get pretty close to there right now with just the way it is, because it's quite smooth. But I want it to be as smooth as I can get it. You don't have to do this, but I am. I've just got some of these little very fine, this is a 1500 grit wet dry sandpaper. I got this at the auto parts store. You'll get a better bang for your buck if you get full-size wet dry sandpaper from Home Depot or something like that, or just your basic hardware store. But I've got these, and I'm going to use it because in the flat areas it comes with the little pad right here that'll Velcro on there, and it keeps everything pretty flat. Not necessary, but I've got it, so I'm going to use it at least on these flat sides here. By the way, if you feel like I'm skipping over too much stuff as far as showing you, just saying that I'm doing it, let me know in the comments. I just dipped it in the water and very lightly. I like going in little circles because it doesn't give you those long scratch marks, but honestly this is so fine that if I'm getting those, I'm doing something wrong. What's great about wet sanding, the water is just basically a lubricant, so you don't scratch everything up too much. But it's also great because the water actually cleans up the sandpaper, and you don't have that problem where the sandpaper is constantly being clogged up. Now remember, this filler primer is really thin. It's just sprayed on here a couple times, maybe by now 5 times maybe, because I think we did 3 the first time. and then, you know, a few more little coats. So I'm not pushing down at all. And I'm going to go through this whole thing. I'm not really trying to change anything. I'm just trying to sort of give it a polish. And we're usually kind of doing this to give it a tooth for the paint to cling to. But in this case, since we've already got the primer on there, I just want to get this as smooth as I can. And then we'll spray over that. And I'll show you for these large flat areas. Now, ideally, I think I've got 400 and I've got this 1200 or 1500. I think somewhere between 800 and 1000 would probably be a little bit better, but you know, this is going to work. We'll just have to do a little bit more work with this extra fine stuff. I think the 400 at this point, which is what we did before wet sanding, I think we've done enough of that. So this is just going to keep it where it's flat. Once again, it's not necessary, but if you have something like this, then go ahead and use it. And you don't need to see, you know, you don't really need to watch me do this for the whole thing. I'm trying to keep the videos a little bit shorter. I doubt it's going to work, but you know, at least I'm attempting it. So once I go over everything, I'll be right back. I finished with the wet sanding, and I mean, I didn't go, you know, I wasn't crazy about it. I only spent maybe 30 minutes on this whole thing. And be careful when you're wet sanding, you know, be mindful of your electronics. You know, if you get a bunch of water on this switch, you're going to have problems. That goes for this next stage or task, which is I'm just going to clean off. I've dipped this paper towel in some water, and I'm just going to clean everything off. And you're not going to be able to do a whole lot of sanding here. It's just, you know, it's going to be a different texture anyway, so I'm not worried about it. I probably could have opened this up and sanded down in here, but I'm not really worried about it. Now I'm just going to take some clean, dry paper towel. You can also use a rag for this. Just trying to remove any dry, you know, anything that's dried. Not much is coming up, so I think we're good. Now on this, I'm kind of out of order here, but when I did this caulking down underneath here, I was able to paint it after about 30 minutes, but even after that, if you just barely touched it, it was super soft to the touch. So I've actually let this cure overnight before I came back out here. So this part of the project, you're gonna need to really exercise some patience. You know, let the caulking cure as much as it needs to. For the most part, you're not gonna have huge globs like this that take a long time to cure. You know, all these little seams we did, that's gonna take, you know, 20 or 30 minutes. But this took, you know, 12 to 18 hours probably. And we're about to start putting paint on that's going to take up to, you know, 48 hours to really dry properly. Just follow what it says on the paint that you're using. But we're about to make this whole thing silver, and with silver paints, I have found that even if it says you know, if you reapply in an hour, you're okay. You really need to wait the full curing time on silver so that it doesn't just peel up or dull out when you put something on top of it. If you want it to stay, you know, silver, it needs to cure fully. Now on the Vambrace, it's not super shiny metal when the metal's showing through, so it's not hypercritical. But I'd rather have it shiny and dull it down if I need to, than to want it to be shiny metallic and have it look gray. Now if we paint this silver and then at the end the silver looks like this, we've kind of missed out. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm still going to let this wait 20 minutes, 30 minutes, just so that I know that if there's any little spots of moisture down in somewhere. I want to make sure that there's not any water anywhere on here, because that's definitely going to be a problem when we're painting. I may just go over this filler area with the little sandpaper. No, I'm not going to. You don't see it, it'll be fine. I'm afraid if I sand it, I'm going to have to do this whole cleaning process over again. So make sure everything dries out and I'll be right back. Okay, so this is plenty dry. There's absolutely no water anywhere on it. I've got it to where when I touch it, it doesn't feel like there's any sand or any powder on it from the sanding off all the filler primer. So we can actually start painting. And the secret to a good chrome metal metallic finish is to start out with a nice gloss black. It needs to be a shiny gloss black finish. So I've got some Rust-Oleum gloss black here, and this is the first step of the final paint on this. So you don't want to glob on a lot of paint. You want to go on very light. So this says it's going to be dry to the touch in 15 minutes and then fully dry in 24. And that you should reapply paint within the hour or after 24 hours. I think I'm going to go ahead and wait a full 24 hours on this one piece, on this black to dry. But that doesn't mean you have to completely wait for a day, because don't forget this piece. I've got to do everything we did that to this. And then we'll go ahead and tomorrow we can go ahead and put on the silver. I know it's painful, but we just have to be patient in things like this. Okay, we're back, and it's actually been 48 hours because when I checked the paint again, it said it has to dry a full 48 hours before you can put any more paint on it. So it's been 2 days since we painted this black. Here is the rocket blaster, or whatever you want to call it. Now this still has another 24 hours to go, so I'm not painting it today. But this has got a full 48 hours, so we can go ahead and paint it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to paint this completely silver to look like it's made of metal, basically. And you can go out and find all kinds of what look like amazing silver, chrome, mirror paints. And trust me, I've tried about, I don't know, at least a couple of dozen of them. And they pretty much almost all suck. I mean, they're not bad, they're metallic, they just don't look like a mirror finish. They don't look like chrome. They don't look like polished metal at all. They basically look like a high gloss gray, which is okay for a lot of things, but we're going for a real metallic finish here, so we wanted to have a little bit more of that metallic feel. So the only two paints that I can really suggest for this, there is a Rust-Oleum, this is where you're going to be able to see it, Rust-Oleum Mirror Effect. Now, one of the reasons why I showed you this other piece, this is easily confused. I mean, they have almost the same labels for this metallic, which this is not good, this is good. The other one that I can suggest is this Krylon Premium Metallic Original Chrome. This is what I'm actually use today. Just whichever one you can find, whichever one of these two you can find, use those. Now these are not going to give you a super high mirror finish no matter what they say or what their caps look like, but they will look pretty metallic. There are some amazing paints out there. We have this Moloto Liquid Chrome. This stuff looks like you're painting with mercury. There's also some stuff on the market called, what is it called? I think it's just called Chrome. Or no, it's called Mirror. I think it's just called Mirror. And it's also magical stuff, maybe even a little better than the Moloto. But those two you have to spray on with an airbrush, and most people don't have an airbrush, so we're not going to go that route. Besides, we really don't need a mirror finish for this. We just want it to look metal. So we're going to go for the Krylon Premium Metallic Original Chrome. If you can't find any of those paints, then just find the best chrome paint you can find. But I've wasted enough time on this. Let's go ahead and paint. Now we've got our high gloss black, and we just want to dust this silver on there. If we start putting a lot of paint on, we're going to get drips and runs, and that's going to ruin everything. So, also, oddly enough, when I get a lot of this paint or any of this silver on, it actually looks less silver than it does when it's a lighter coating. So we just want to go on this real light until it looks like metal. I'm just trying to even out some darker areas. Just trying to get all of the angles here. Also, I have a fan going because you don't want to be breathing this stuff in. I should have a respirator on, but you just can't hear me talk when I do that. Just like the glossy black, this silver is hard to see when you've missed things. But you can come back and put a second coat on. So I'm going to let this dry a bit, and then I'll take a look at it, and if we need to put another coat on, we'll do that then. So it's been 15 minutes, and that's how long this says it takes for it to be dry to the touch, but you can't really handle it yet. Not for another 2 hours. But I can see there's a few spots that need a little bit more paint. So all I've done is I've flipped it around so that it's the part that was up is now down and vice versa. So when I paint it this time, it will, hit places that I missed the first time. And I've hit it well enough that you can see some areas where I did not do a very good job of sanding it. But that's fine. I'll actually use that to my advantage when we get ready to start putting the weathering on here. Just like before, I'm just going to go over it lightly. I don't want to, get pools of paint anywhere, or definitely not runs or drips. This stuff's a little bit better than most paints in that it says that you can pretty much apply more paint at any time after it's dry, which is 15 minutes. At most 2 hours. Definitely getting a nice metallic look to it now. So we're good. I'm gonna let this dry for a couple of hours. I'll put some more silver on the blaster or rocket, whatever you want to call it, tomorrow, and then we'll be ready to go on. So it's been about 36 hours since I've painted this silver. It says that it's completely dry after 2 hours, but it's after 2 hours, yes, it feels dry, but just the amount of pressure it takes to hold this, and I don't know if you can see it, but you can see fingerprints on here, so I can, right across there. And those fingerprints are just from the paint being so soft that the amount of force that's necessary just to hold this puts those fingerprints in there. Now, that's not a big deal on this because we're going to paint this a completely different color. But we do want it to be, good underneath. So I've waited until it doesn't feel sticky or oily at all. Because what we're going to do is we're going to paint some masking liquid over the areas we want to be silver, and if this isn't completely dry, when you peel that off, it's going to take all of the shiny part off of here, and you're just going to get a gray, a gray background. And we definitely don't want that. We want this to look metallic. So it has to be completely dry. In this case, I've just checked it, every 8 hours or so, whenever I'm up, I'll go in there and check it. And if it's a little bit tacky or a little bit oily feeling, then it's not ready yet. But that said, we're good to go now. It's also been raining a fair amount right now, so humidity's up and it might not take as long for you. And I've got some different masking liquids here. These are both from the same company. The only difference between these two is the size of the applicator. This is a small, fine, but it's a fine point, but it's not super fine. This one's a bit finer. You notice these have little wire, I hope you can see that. They have little wires that stick out of them and they fit inside the little needle applicator. That just keeps it clean. Because this is essentially liquid latex, and so it will definitely clog up. I also have this, which I've never used before, but it's a masking fluid in pen form, and I really like the company, so I thought I'd give it a try. Just reading the directions, this says that it should work fine as long as you rub it off within 48 hours. The paint that we're going to paint over this only takes 24 hours to fully cure, it says. So I think we should be good as far as removing this after you know, within 48 hours. I'm going to go with the finest point of this. I may, you know, try the other one, the pen, for a couple things just to see how it works. But the very first thing I want to do is I'm just kind of looking over this, and you can see certain areas right in here where there's some rough areas. Same goes for back here. If I can get the right way. And right through here. And you know, I could have done a better job of sanding those, but I didn't. They're a little harder to see when it's not silver. And you want to find all of those areas, and I'm going to go over them with the masking fluid, because they're already dings. They're the perfect places to put scratches, and you want to try to get a thin, you know, as thin as you can really get it. You don't have to go over it perfectly, because if something's going to ding it, it's going to take off more paint than the actual little ding area. So it's more of a bump than anything. So I'm going to leave that. So it might be a long scratch here, but that doesn't mean you have to mask it off as a long scratch. You can do a larger area. You want to be as irregular as you can. I'm hoping you can see this. Got a lot of rough areas up here. Here we've got, it's kind of a texture to it, so I'm just going to sort of dot in a bunch of this. You can't even see that. Okay. You don't want to push too much, or you'll get way too much of this masking fluid. If you squeeze it real hard, you'll get a lot of stuff and probably mask off a lot more than you want. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to, oh, we got a little bit. Now I've got some signs where this has been put together. You know, you can kind of see where this piece is attached to that point piece. I don't want to mask that off because I don't want to highlight those areas. So I'm not going to put a line there. There's a big ding right here. Okay, now I'm going to put a lid on this. Now this stuff is dry when it is clear. So I'm going to go ahead and hang this up just like I did when I was painting it, and we'll go on from there as soon as this is dry. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes and it's not 100% dry. You can still see some white areas there, but I think it's going to be good enough. I don't want to set this down. Ideally, I'd like to let it get completely dry so I could set this down without worrying about it, but I think I'm going to hold it in my hand anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and go with it. I've got pictures here on my iPad. Finding accurate photos, I mean, honestly, I suspect that the ones that were used in the movie were different from each other. But I did find, after looking a lot, you know, just looking for different images, I found this one, and I think this might be actual pictures of the prop itself, but I'm not 100% sure. But at least I saw some details that I found on other pictures that I think are of the props. I mean, some of these line up. So, you know, there's no way for me to know for sure that this is the actual prop, but I think maybe it is. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of follow this pattern. I mean, already there's going to be differences because I've started marking up some of the dings, natural dings that are on here. And, you know, that's going to be different from here, but, you know, I'm not trying to make it exactly the same. I mean, this clearly is something that happened at a different time period than the, you know, Return of the Jedi, because I've got some stuff from Empire Strikes Back on here. Not on this piece, but on my costume in general. So, you know, there'll be some differences, but I'm going to try to do it as accurately as I can. Now, if you'll notice on the rocket piece, I'm going to do that a little bit differently. Besides, it's still drying. I'm just going to shake this up really well. I'm never quite sure if I should shake up the fluid because you get bubbles. It's like I shake it up and then I let it sit for a couple of hours. Okay, the color of this one is blue. But I'll see if I can just kind of go along. I mean, if you notice this whole upper edge, not all of it, but about halfway down is pretty speckly, beat up. So I'll go ahead and do that. And I want to be as, you know, sort of rough about it as I can. So I don't know how well this is going to work, so we'll do this one section and then I'll go back to what I know for sure. Now when you're taking the caps off of these, if you're using this kind, make sure that you're only removing the colored. I'm going to have to set this down. You don't want to unscrew this whole thing, you want to make sure to unscrew just the cap. So along here, after the second button, we want a pretty good, maybe not a run, we don't want a run. But we want a pretty big. I'm going to wipe that off. So if you get a bigger area than you want, just clean it off. Just make sure you get all of the masking off, because you know anything that you leave on there will show up later on. So I'm going to try not to squeeze the bottle at all. And on the side I've got an area right below that that's bigger. See, now I'm not squeezing it all, I'm just trying to move this around a little bit. And it's fairly smooth across the bottom. It's about 1.5 inches long. More jagged at the top, actually. Can you see any of this? And then above that and further back, there's another piece that kind of continues it on. I think that kind of goes up to a larger piece across the edge. Also, this front corner piece right here has a pretty big chunk just off the corner, running up the edge a little bit. And then on this end, there's also some. I'm getting a big drip there. Wipe some of that off. And the top edge has got kind of, I hope you can see, kind of this shape, kind of gets smaller. And then it angles down and comes forward again. And then it kind of goes back and ends a bit like that. And I can kind of fill this in. This is why I don't like to use the bigger one, because even this smaller needle, you know, kind of tends to overflow. Okay, so I've just got kind of a jagged edge up here, and then it comes to where it's just barely there in the middle. I'm going to start out by making just kind of a general area. Sorry, it's difficult for me to see and for you to see. And once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and come in with some of the rougher stuff. And over here, it kind of comes out pretty big there, and then back. That's not true. Then there's some little kind of gaps. And then I've got a pretty big area around the edge back here. Kind of starts in the middle. Okay. And then there's a large kind of an oval section with another piece above it and a little one next to that. Okay, now you notice this one down here. So after the buttons, sort of a little bit closer to the buttons in the back, but sort of right in between, it's kind of a little wedge. It's higher up in the front and then works its way backwards. And then from there, there's a couple of big spots, little dots. And okay, now in between, a little bit closer to the back, but in between that one and the back, so not quite in the middle, but a little bit past the middle, we've got a little, looks like a little cat with ears. I've made mine too big, but that's okay. So I think I'm going to take my rag again, and I'm going to wipe some of this off the edge here. And even this little thin stuff will stop the paint from sticking to it, so try to get it all off of there. Okay, that's a little better. Up on this top edge of this piece right here, I'm not even squeezing it all anymore, it's still just kind of flowing out. Yeah, it's basically just definitely don't squeeze it while you're down here. You'll get a big mess that way. And you might want to practice this on a few pieces of scrap before you start trying to do it for real. And then we've got this piece that kind of looks like a V. Starts with, where am I? There we go. That's not where it starts. Starts with a little bit of a blob. And then this corner, and then up to there, kind of like that. Got a little bit of damage on this corner piece right here. This corner right here is badly dinged. Also helps if I'm not doing this pointing down, if I do it more horizontal. Let's see what I'm working on now. I'm going to continue this. It's pretty good. I'm going to give it a little bit around the corner here. Yeah, now that I've got this angled up, got a lot more control with it. So let that be a lesson. Try to work more horizontal and less, up and down. A little bit out of practice. Okay, now I'm going to do this corner right in here. Just a couple of spots. Definitely the corner. This corner up here, which you cannot see. The back area back here is pretty badly banged up. I think what's happened now is I've got a clog. Let me unclog this and I'll be right back. Before I grab that, I just want to show you my hand. You can see that's where the silver is still coming off onto my hand. I'm holding it on the inside so that it doesn't rub off anything on the outside, but this is after, a couple of days. It's still rubbing off. It's still not 100%. These silver paints just take forever, way more than they say it takes for them to purely cure. Okay, I'm going to do some of this, kind of skipped this part earlier, but this section right up here, this edge is pretty beat up. I'll move up to here, and this whole little corner is banged up pretty good. There's a highlight right there, so it's really hard to see. And it kind of runs down this edge a little bit. I'm going to run down this edge. This edge doesn't actually seem to exist on the actual piece, but it does on mine. So like I said before, I could just sand that whole this whole section much thinner and get rid of these little lines here, these little curves, but I like it. Got a few dings up here. Might as well ding at this. It looks pretty beat up, so. Little spots just kind of touching it. I think I'm hitting the camera. I'm really sorry. That was not a little spot. That was a big spot. But just touching it, little spots, that'll help break up all this, how messy this is. And on this corner right here, I'm also going to hit that pretty good, as well as the back. Because these corners are what's going to be getting hit the most. You got to get something on every corner a little bit. Okay, it looks like there's a fair amount there, and then there's a pretty big area here. Okay, there's kind of a big area here. I'm going to incorporate it into what I've got here. It kind of starts out small. Gets wider. just like that. Also looks like there's a little damage. Maybe put damage on here in this corner, and a little damage here. Don't want to look like a drop, like a drip though. So let's see if I can fix that. Above this second from the back, little piece there, got a little thing there. And that's looking pretty good. The very front, this whole corner is dinged up, which kind of lines up with the damage already had there, which is good. And then right in the middle, it kind of comes down, then back up, and runs across the top. Color that in a little bit. I'm going to run a little bit there. Yeah, I thought about doing the whole area, but I think I'd rather, because that is silver, but I think I'd rather go back and paint that again silver at the end than try to peel off all this masking fluid after I paint it. It's going to be difficult to get the masking fluid out of those little numbers and buttons and stuff. So I'm going to hang this up and we'll take a look at this after it's dried. Okay, I forgot to do the areas right around the two switches, the two buttons over here. And they're fairly spidery and I don't want them to look too blobby. So I'm definitely going to go with the pen. I think on a different day I might go the other direction, but the way things have been working with my normal stuff, it's just coming out, flooding out and making way too much of a liquidy, blobby sort of shape. So we're going to go with the pen. And it kind of starts sticking out as a little line. Maybe I should zoom in here. And kind of comes in from this side also. Can you see any of that? Yeah, I think I'm going to have to pull these off. Maybe I can just stick them back on before I paint. I want to make sure that I get in there. I mean, I can also go in here with a silver pen afterwards if I need to. That goes for anything. Yeah, the problem with this is it seems to be water-based and it does not want to stick to this silver, which is pretty much lacquer base. That's a nice spidery kind of shape there. Looks like it comes off this direction a little bit more. Like that maybe. So that looks pretty good there. For the back one, it's more the back side. So you have kind of a part that sticks out here away from the button. And then it kind of comes in around the back. I'm sorry, this is so hard to see. This would be, this is one more good reason to join Patreon and become a patron so that I could afford to get some help on this. No pressure. And it also sticks out quite a bit on the opposite side. And a little bit in the front, but not as bad. Okay. So that's what I'm going to go with there. And I'll let this dry, and then we can go ahead and put on the coat of red. So all of my masking fluid is all completely dry. There's still a little bit of color and a few things, but I don't think it's ever going to change beyond that. So now you want to go ahead and paint this the same color that you painted for the area around the visor on your helmet. It's that burgundy red color. I'm going to use this right here, which is Rust-Oleum's Satin Claret Wine. There's also Rust-Oleum Cabernet Satin, which is essentially the exact same color. From what I can tell on my paint tests early on, they look identical. I'm sure there's some slight variation, but to my eye, they're the same. I can't remember which one I actually used. The fact that I still have this claret wine means I probably used the Cabernet, but you know, I still have this, so I'm going to use this. It's essentially the same color. And just like before, I want to do light coats. I don't want to just put a lot of paint on there. It'll take longer for it to dry. Also, it will, you know, you have the potential for runs and stuff like that. So I just want to do light coats. Try to hit it from all different directions. Okay, I'm going to let this dry for a little bit, then I'll put on another coat. It's been 10 minutes, and for this paint it says to do all of your coats within 1 hour or after 42 hours, so, or 48 hours. So, you know, I'm going to let this have 10 minutes in between each coat. So another light coat, but you can go heavier than you did on the first one. Almost guarantee I'm going to need to get up here. I hope you can still see this. Okay. Wait another 10 minutes and I'll do a third coat. 10 minutes have passed, and so I'm going to put on a third coat. This is probably the last coat I do. You always want to be careful with these areas because you put a lot of paint on the flat areas trying to get on these side areas. It's really easy to develop a run there. Okay. So we could, at this point, just wait 20 minutes, and that's how long it's supposed to take for this to dry to the touch. Maybe wait 2 hours to make sure that it says it's, you know, dry enough to handle. That's probably it. So we could wait 2 hours and then peel off all of the fluid, the masking fluid. But I'm afraid that while that would be great for removing the masking fluid, it might damage the paint that's around it when you start rubbing on it and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and wait the full 24 hours, which is what this says it takes to fully cure. And so it's just one of those times we've got to have patience. So we'll take a look at this tomorrow. It's been 48 hours, maybe a little more, since we sprayed the red on, and you know, I came out after 24 and it was just a little sticky, and I hung it outside in the sun, you know, to try to cure it a little bit. And you know, that was yesterday. It's parts of it feel pretty good now. Other parts are still a little sticky. In fact, you know, I got this paint on my hand carrying this out here. So, you know, part of it's good, part of it's a little damp still. I'm tired of babying it. If it gets dinged up a little bit, that's just more dings. And I'm a little worried about the parts where we used the pin that said that it was only good for 48 hours and then it would start to stick. So, you know, we're going to push it. Hopefully it'll work this time. I've got just a plastic scraper, and I've got a rag, and I've got my fingernails. If you're using toothpaste or mustard or something like that, I found that using a damp rag helps a lot, because you've got to deal with the toothpaste or whatever after you've scraped this off. And beyond that, let's just do it. You just have to get in here and scrape it off. Hopefully you don't get too much of the paint around it messed up. You want it to look like dry paint that's, you know, broken off, as opposed to soft paint that's been worn off. So you have to be a little bit gentle with this paint. You can see the little scrape marks, probably you can. So there's little scrape marks on there from using the scraper. Most of the unwanted damage that you get from this we can hide later on when we're weathering it. And by weathering it, I mean, you know, putting dirt and oils and things on it too, as opposed to damaging it. This stage we're doing damaging. Later on we'll be doing weathering. Go ahead and take off the masking elements at this point as well. For the masking fluid, your fingers are going to work the best. For toothpaste, I find that the damp rag works the best. Yeah, so the problem is, as I'm rubbing, I'm actually rubbing some of the silver has come stuck to my finger and is rubbing off onto the soft reddish burgundy color, which is not ideal. But like everything else, we can fix it. So overall, the silver is looking pretty good, but it seems like maybe it could have used another day before I put the masking fluid on it. Only because I'm getting the silver rubbing off onto the other paint. So that may or may not be a problem later on. Patience is everything. On the other hand, you know, this is a beat up thing. It's not going to be pretty. You know, this shouldn't look pristine when you're done. So I think everything's going to be fine. Now you're probably going to be, even after you finish all this, you'll probably come along and find a spot that you forgot about. You'll feel a little high spot and rub that off, 2 days from now. You always find little extras that you forgot about. You don't want to get too aggressive and take off paint that you didn't want to come off. But I think that's pretty much everything. I'm going to keep wiping off the little chunks of masking fluid. But there is the damage. And we can go on to the weathering. So here it is after I've kind of cleaned off as much as I could, and I found a couple extra spots that I didn't notice before, and I probably will continue to do that for a while. But before I paint this, start to weather this, this is still pretty soft. I think I'm going to go hang this up. It's hot outside and not humid today, so I'm going to go ahead and hang this up out in the sun and see if I can't get this paint to cure a little better. Okay, so we're back to the rocket here, and you might be able to tell that I have tried a few things as far as painting directly on here. I really was committed to the fact that I would just paint the black onto here, but it's being very problematic. So I think I'm actually going to go back to what we did with the Gauntlet itself, and that is we're going to go ahead and use our liquid masking fluid. I keep saying that. But I am going to try something different. I've got a brush here, and I've got a little rag here because I'm going to have to be constantly cleaning off this brush, because as this stuff starts to dry on the brush, it's going to be pulling the masking fluid off as fast as I can put it on. So we'll see how this works. I have my reference picture here, which you probably can't see. And I'm really going to work on hitting the corners and edges really well. I mean, I don't want it to be just a line of latex. It needs to look worn. You're not going to be able to see much until we actually paint this, but I'm trying to remove some. I actually started this to see if it would work earlier, and I think I was looking at the wrong piece when I did this right here. It's fairly humid today, and I can feel the paint feels tacky, but I think that's just the humidity. I do have a reference photo which I'm kind of going by. But just for a couple of big pieces, mostly I'm just hitting the corners and the edges. If you mess up, you just scratch it off. Get the backs. Okay, so I could go ahead and paint all this stuff as well, but I think I'll just mask that off with some tape, and then if I need to, go over with some black as just a wash, I think that'll work for that. Now this section back here is also black with a lot of silver showing, so I think that one I'll go ahead and paint as well. And it's mostly black, but it's got a fair amount of silver showing, so I'm just making some fairly large blobs here. And then of course the edges here, well, that's really mostly silver anyway, but here, the edges, of course, are very silver. I hope you can see some of this. And I probably could have done this with the applicator like I did before, but I'm just trying something a little different. I'm trying to get a little bit finer control over this. I'm trying to get inside this back area as well for them. I'm going to do the same thing somewhat on the back of this. So I think this gets black as well. Okay, now I'm just going to let this dry for a little bit. I'm gonna let this dry a little bit, and then we'll come back and mask some other stuff off with the masking tape. So we've come to the inevitable part of the video where my audio is completely messed up, and so I'm gonna have to do a voiceover here. I have no idea what I'm saying here, but probably mentioning that you don't have to have any kind of special tape here, just some type of masking tape. You don't want to use, duct tape or something like that. But, any old masking tape will work fine for this. Originally, I was trying to mask off part of the round section that's between the whistling birds area and the rest of it. So it would be sort of half black and half of the copper color. But I think it's better off if you just make the copper go down to where the cylinder starts, and then from that would just be silver. So instead of making a tiny little thin sliver of tape, I would cut a piece of tape that's roughly the same size as that whole gap is. So that whole section will be silver in the end. Or you can just do what I ended up doing, which was to paint that section in silver later. And you're going to want to repeat this process for the gap in the back. It's quite a bit narrower, so it's going to work out a lot easier with the tape, but you can certainly go ahead and paint this in later as well. You can see here I'm just using a citrus peeler to get in the narrow areas, and then I'm cutting off the extra tape because I can't go around the base. This part's pretty straightforward. I'm just taking a piece of tape and I'm running it around this one barrel section. It doesn't have to be perfect because we've already put that piece of tape down in the gap. And then you can line this back piece up level with the back of the barrel piece. Now what we need to do is to wrap up this whistling birds section, and that's not the way to do it. And you can see from this that I got a phone call while I was working on it, and it shut off my camera. So what you want to do is to take some tape and to tear it up into small sections, and from there you can kind of just place them randomly all over to wrap the whole section up. Remember, it doesn't have to be neat or pretty. We just need to cover this whole section so that it doesn't get any paint on it. So now we can go ahead and paint, and you just want to use any flat or matte black spray paint. It's been an hour, so we can go ahead and start removing some of this stuff. It's been fairly humid, so I actually brought that in the house for it to dry without being so humid. Oh, that's annoying. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hit this real quick with black, and then we'll try again after this is cured. It's been another hour, and I can finally start to remove all this masking material. You can see the little strips that I used to cover this. Oh, looks like it pulled some of the silver off. That's not good. It's pulling a lot of the silver off. I think this masking tape is fairly heavy duty. It's okay, I'm going to cover up most of this with some rub and buff. I think maybe I'll leave this tape on for a while so I don't mess it up too badly while I'm trying to pull off all this masking fluid. It's looking pretty good. go ahead and remove this. Oh yeah, I've got this back part as well. I think that's got it. It's also taken some of the silver off, but it's actually not a bad effect under the circumstances. Okay. So now we're sort of caught up with the Vambrace. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end this video right here. We're almost at 2 hours as it is. And I know these pictures were taken before I painted the rocket. And in the next video, which is already shot, we'll go ahead and finish this project up. If you like this video or found it helpful, why not go ahead and give it a thumbs up? And of course, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming videos. You can also click that little bell so you'll be instantly notified when new videos come out. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer them. You know, it's really your likes, comments, and subscriptions that motivate me to keep this channel going. So, until next time, thanks.